Welcome to How to Successfully Roll Out Snyk across your business and enterprise. My name is Stacy Levine and I'm a Customer Success Manager here at Snyk. So who is this talk for? Well, it's really for anybody that will listen, but the people that will get the most out of this are those that are getting ready to bring Snyk on board at the business or enterprise level, or those who are really early in their adoption. Now, there are many options to roll out Snyk, and there's no way I can cover everything in this presentation. But there are some commonalities across the board, and that's what I'm hoping to share today. So when we start, we look at this as a phased approach, and there's several stages that you go through. First is standing up the platform. Think of this as the technical bits. And then we go to education and champions. So what do you tell your people? Then visibility and goal setting. Then we move on to stopping the bleeding. And the last step is fixing the backlog. So we'll go through all of these steps in just the next few minutes. The first part of standing up the platform is authentication and authorization. So how are your users going to log into Snyk? Now, Snyk can certainly use social logins like GitHub and Bitbucket and Google, but most larger companies have an SSO strategy and tooling in place. And of course, Snyk can integrate with Okta and Auth0. We can use SAML and OpenID and ADFS and more. When setting this up, something you need to consider is you might need an internal resource to help you with the setup. So what am I saying? Do you have Okta admin permissions? Or do you need to open a ticket with the right team to arrange the resource to be able to do this? Now, integrating with Snyk is not difficult, but it does take the right level of permissions on both sides, and it's something we're happy to work with you. So the next part of standing up the platform is how are you going to organize things? So Snyk has the concept of groups and organizations. So it's a little bit different than how you might think initially. The top level is a group, which has one or more organizations underneath it. Organizations work like folders, and you can set security rules, access. You're going to roll up reports against those organizations into a group. Different people use organizations differently. And as for groups, if you're a large organization, you might even have multiple groups. And these groups could align with business units, companies, or other things. Right? And you can see in the second example here where we create the organizations by apps or by teams or by front end, back end. Again, we could talk for a long time about this. There happens to be an in-depth video from SnykCon last year on our website where you can learn all about this. And this is what the UI looks like. Now, I happen to have access to multiple groups here, and you can see I'm looking at a group on the left and the organizations below it. The next step in standing up the platform is talking about integrations. Integrations is a big topic. Snyk can integrate with a lot of different things. And again, there's no way we can go through everything. But let's start with source code repositories. So when you're going to talk about a repository, do you have one big repo? Do all of your developers have access to all of the repositories? Or do they have access just to certain areas? In Snyk, do you care if developers can see the repository that they may not be responsible for? Now, again, they're not going to be seeing the repository. They're going to be seeing the reports of vulnerabilities against the repository. All of this actually impacts how you might do organization, what we talked about just on the prior slide. Now, when you're talking about the integrations, there's some technical bits. Are you using a cloud-based solution? If so, that's awesome, right? Make sure that your accounts that you're using have the proper access, which is well documented on our website. And more, if you're using a service account, again, do you have the permission to create the service accounts, or are you going to rely on another team? So maybe you're not using a cloud-based integration and you have an on-prem instance of Bitbucket server. Well, in that case, you're going to need something called Snyk Broker. Now, just in case you're not aware, Snyk Broker is a Docker container that allows the Snyk platform to talk to the thing that it's integrating with. If you need to go this route, you might need someone from your infrastructure team to help. It's actually really easy to install. You download the Docker container, you run it with a few parameters, and that's it. You can, again, be up and running with Snyk Broker in just a matter of minutes, as long as you have the right permission to put the container in place. And this is where you might need help from somebody on another team. So the next part is talking about champions and education. And from small companies to large companies, the best way to roll out any new thing, let alone Snyk, is to develop a set of champions, or experts, if you will. A train-the-trainer approach is a really common way to adopt new tooling. And on our website, we have a robust and ever-growing set of documentation. We have a YouTube channel with lots of incredible videos, and your customer success manager will help you get your experts enabled so that you can have all of the knowledge needed to be successful. Once you have your champions enabled, then it's time to bring on the people. So a huge benefit to this approach and having internal champions is that they can use your own internal language. They know what tools you use, what your internal processes are like, what the personalities of the people are like. This is all incredibly helpful as you're training your teams to use Snyk platform. Right? Keep in mind, this is a change, and sometimes change can be a little bit of work to go through as people adopt new procedures. As you bring on larger and larger sets of developers, something to think about is that it's typically easier to start with a smaller set of developers. I find that it's better to start with those that are open-minded and a little bit more open to these types of toolings. Maybe they're more familiar with security world. This is great. And when you roll out everything as a phased approach, it really makes this more manageable. So now you know. Now, just in case you weren't aware, this is where the company name comes from. But I digress. So we've connected to our repositories. We now have some knowledge of the state of the vulnerabilities of our code base. Right? Don't be concerned. Right? The first step in fixing things is being aware. Now this is where you start to set your goals and the way you're going to approach remediation. The most common approach, it's not the only, just the most common approach, is to address the critical and fixable errors. Potentially, you isolate all fixable externally facing applications, i.e. the ones that have the highest risk, into an organization and you fix those. Again, we could talk for a long time about different approaches. This is something that your customer success manager would be more than happy to share stories and help you talk through things and find the right approach that works for you. The next step is stopping the bleeding. So you fix what you deemed initially mandatory to get fixed, and moving forward, you want to keep vulnerabilities from reaching production again. How do you do this? Well, there are multiple ways. The first one is breaking the build. Now, don't be alarmed. Let me tell you a story about this one. I have one large customer, and this was actually a competitive replacement. So they were already familiar with DevSecOps tooling. Within the first 2 weeks, they had Snyk up and running and integrated with 2,000 plus repositories. They also implemented CI/CD integration using Jenkins, and they wanted to turn on breaking the build. They gave their developers 45 days to either address all critical vulnerabilities or submit to the security team for a waiver or an exception, saying, hey, we're not going to fix this. We don't need to fix this because if that was approved by the security team, then they were allowed to put an ignore file in, and that exception was able to move past. After 45 days, they turned on build breaking, and that meant any code wouldn't make it to production with critical vulnerabilities. Now, not everybody is going to break the build, and one definite thing to consider if you do go this route is to have an exception process in place. If there's a critical situation and you need to put out a patch or something really important, and there's a vulnerability that is going to drag along, it's up to you to decide whether you want to allow it. You just need to have that exception process in place to know how to address it. What's another way you can do this? Well, you can fail at the PR check level. This is very similar to breaking the build, but it's an instance where you're going to stop the code from actually reaching the main code base. If you enable this, there's two typical options. The first one is to fail when there are any critical issues. And the second one is to fail when there are critical issues with known fixes, i.e. the developer should easily be able to fix or address any critical vulnerabilities, and they didn't. So obviously the PR check should fail. So by the way, this PR check failure applies to both security and license checks. So the next step, now that you've seen everything, you've set some goals, you've fixed critical issues, and you've stopped any more major issues from happening, it's time to address everything else. So this is fixing the backlog, reducing the backlog of items that you've declassified as critical or temporarily ignored. You need to do what makes sense for your company and your process. Maybe you're going to fix all externally facing applications. Those have the highest exposure and the highest potential attack vulnerability. Different ways to address this, but now you've got the time and you do what fits your needs. Now, just something to keep in mind. I've been speaking about this as if it's a linear process. We stand up the platform, we see what's going on. No, it's actually iterative in nature. Of course, standing up the platform is typically a one and done thing, unless you add extra integrations later. But normally you would bring on Snyk, find one developer team or one small group of developers, roll out Snyk to them, take some lessons learned, go back, iterate, and roll out across your entire company and organization, utilizing everything that you've gained. This process can take some time, especially if you're in a larger organization with thousands and thousands of developers. Now, some things I want you to take away and keep in mind as you're rolling out Snyk. A checklist. So you want to utilize all your resources, everything from your customer success manager to the YouTube library to monthly online sessions. Right? You want to align with your internal resources to ensure that you can stand up the platform without any roadblocks along the way. You want to identify key stakeholders and champions. These are everything from the executives to influential developers to developer managers. Who's going to be key to rolling it out from an influence and from a sponsor perspective? You want to determine short-term and long-term goals. Is my short-term goal to fix all critical vulnerabilities and stop any more from going to production? Or is it, hey, know my vulnerability footprint, and over the next 6 months, I'm going to reduce my critical vulnerabilities by 25 or 50%. Lots of different ways. And utilize all of the Snyk resources and things that I mentioned. At the end of the slide deck, there will be some links to some great information for you. So in summary, it's absolutely possible to get Snyk up and running in a matter of hours. It may take some time and coordination from other teams, so don't be alarmed, but definitely plan for it. This is a change. Keep that in mind. It's a change, and sometimes people are a little hesitant, reticent about change. But Snyk is a developer-focused platform. That way it should be a relatively easy adoption. Have fun, be secure. So now you know. Thank you very much for your time.